Okay, so welcome to our discussion of the Austen heroine's experience of place. And we did have a bunch of discussion questions that we had sent out. And before we start, I want to put a plug in for this wonderful book called um, Jane Austen and the English Landscape by Mavis Beatty, who is a garden historian who in World War II was a code breaker in Britain. So she's a pretty interesting person, but she knows Jane Austen really well, and she also knows kind of the literature at the time. So for each chapter, she explores a different theme, like Gothic in the garden and in literature, the picturesque. Um, it's just a really good book. I picked mine up on eBay for, I think, about $15. It's do not get it as a Kindle. It has beautiful pictures and it's definitely worth purchasing. So, but lots of like art and gardens, and so anyway, that's my plug for Mavis. Um, so yeah, no specific order to think about. Kind of open to start anywhere people are interested. I know probably most people, the most interesting chapter is probably in Pride and Prejudice when thinking about the Austen heroine's experience of place, thinking about Elizabeth exploring Pemberley. But we can start anywhere. So yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'll dive in, Teresa, if no one else wants to start. Um, the reason is because you mentioned Pride and Prejudice. So I just finished taking part in the JASNA Pride and Prejudice big read. I don't know if anyone else did that. So if they did, they're going to know what I'm going to say, which was that so I didn't need to do homework for that for Pride and Prejudice because we talked about this a lot. But I just noticed when I read Pride and Prejudice, that section, it really struck me that when Elizabeth goes to Pemberley with Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner and Darcy appears, that the whole next few pages is actually like a dance. You've got people changing partners. Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner walk along, and then Elizabeth and Mr. Gardiner walk along, and then she walks with Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy sort of appears and then disappears. The paths are all winding. Every time they turn a bend in the path, and it's a different view. And it just struck me that the landscape is extremely dynamic. And it's a real turning point, not only as a dance, but sort of metaphorically as a dance, but in the novel. And after that, then Elizabeth's feelings towards Darcy really start to change. So I just think that that's just a very dynamic scene.
What's interesting, Mavis Beatty talks about how it's really the like kind of concept behind that chapter for the author is probably the picturesque, and that we don't hear anything about gardens. All we hear about are kind of the natural landscape, the woods, which is pretty interesting if you think about like the grand estates at that time. Chatsworth has like miles and miles of gardens. So it's probably not Chatsworth. Um, and Mavis Beatty thinks that it's actually Pemberley is probably modeled after um, an estate that's more in a kind of hilly area where there isn't a lot of gardens. Um,
Mm.
so that I think that's another interesting feature of that is like it really is this pretty wild area that she's describing. There's paths, but there's not a lot of kind of art, statues or um, buildings or things like that that are often in
She
gardens at that time.
she emphasizes the natural state of Pemberley versus, say, Rosings. So, and that appeals to her more.
Yeah.
What I noticed is some of the language that she used to describe the landscape could also be used to describe Elizabeth's new perception of Mr. Darcy. It was neither formal nor falsely adorned. It was not gaudy or uselessly fine, but had true elegance. And I thought that language, she was looking at Pemberley, but seeing it as a representation of Mr. Darcy.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That term uselessly fine is a really great way to describe character if you consider Miss Bingley, for example. She's got no actual resources, she can't really do anything. And again, Lady Catherine and Anne de Bourgh and their surroundings represent that. But yeah, I think that's great, Diana. Yeah, it shows exactly who Darcy is.
There was a lot of overlap in some of the books regarding what is Jane Austen's feeling about landscape improvements.
Mm.
And I saw that in Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, and Emma, where she points out that she doesn't like ostentation or pride. She's not against improvements as long as they're natural and more subtle. And in Emma, she describes the view of Donwell Abbey was old neglect of prospect. The timber, which neither fashion nor extravagance had rooted up. And so I think she's really pushing on this idea of, it's okay to improve your prospect, improve the landscape a little bit, as long as you do it in a very natural way, not a very prideful, ostentatious way. And going back to Pride and Prejudice, I think another thing that when Elizabeth saw Pemberley, what it told her about Darcy is that Pemberley was, this just my little scribble notes, Pemberley isn't a McMansion. And so that was how I took it to be, that she saw that it wasn't ostentatious and bland and just improved for the sake of improvement and showing off wealth, like a McMansion would be. So that's all.
Yeah, she uses the word awkward. It doesn't have an awkward taste, which is again kind of like one of those picturesque words, like you don't want to be awkward, and and like Darcy's, Pemberley is not awkward. But
I can't help but wonder if she likes Pemberley because it reminds her a little bit of the landscape around Longbourn. She was raised in a natural environment, you would think, and that would be Longbourn. And so she, expects Pemberley to be much more ornate than Longbourn, but she gets there and finds out that it's not.
yeah,
So I think she's probably influenced by that to some extent.
it's probably much hillier around compared to I guess I'm trying to think what English county. I know it's north of London, but I can't remember the English county that Longbourn's in.
Hertfordshire.
Hertfordshire, yeah. I was getting it confused with Hampshire, which is where Jane Austen grew up. But yeah, so like, it's not as hilly, but definitely has that natural that piece of nature. It's interesting if you compare like the way that Austen writes about the experience of the landscape versus like some of like Anne Radcliffe, some of the other authors that are maybe a little bit before her, um, like the other ones will go on and on and on and just stop. But Austen's like pretty short and sweet in talking about people's reactions.
And yet she gets her point across. Yeah.
Yeah. I know we have some Marianne fans here, so I wanna see how Marianne, her reaction to landscape seems very informed by literature and poems and other literature. So wanted to see, like I think especially when you just take out those quotes in isolation, it's kind of like, at least for me, it felt like Marianne was a little bit over the top. Um, but I know we have Marianne fans, so I want to hear from other people to see if they felt like, she kind of overdoes her reaction to the landscape.
No, no. It's her reaction to dead leaves, to poor Norland left bereft by, the unlove that it's getting from Fanny and John versus her complete love. Is perfectly fine, particularly for a 17-year-old. Even those slightly north of 17-year-old have been known to dance in dead leaves and more in locations long forgotten. So her reactions are perfect. Walking around Cleveland, it's a whole new landscape for her. So she might as well walk as far as she can and, see that view in the distance to some little place that somebody might live in. That's perfectly fine reaction, particularly with wet socks and, wet shoes and so forth.
Yeah, and after all, who's going to admire the trees when she's gone?
Yes, right.
I think
There's
more of an Elinor.
I find that Jane Austen as I was reading through all of these and just focusing on the landscape, then I find that Jane Austen really uses how the different characters interact and view the landscape to exemplify their characters. A lot, which I could talk about a lot more, but I just noticed that in Sense and Sensibility, when I was just looking at it again, there's this just really brilliant contrast in that conversation about the dead leaves, where I just read it, where Marianne says, "And there beneath that farthest hill which rises with such grandeur is our cottage." And then Edmund, I think, says, "It's a beautiful country," he replied, "but these bottoms must be dirty in winter." So it's like, oh, it's rising, it's beautiful. And then it's like, right down. Like Edmund's always like so practical and Marianne's just so lofty. It's just hilarious, the contrast. I think it's really funny.
I felt like that they were using Edward's comments on the landscape to show how similar he was to Elinor. They're both very practical, not romantic, and they're so much alike, and they're meant for each other because they both see the landscape for what it is: dirt and dead leaves.
That's true.
And happy villagers as opposed to Bandini.
Yeah. Although Elinor is an artist, and I feel like there actually probably is more emotional response that she has to the landscape, but because of her having to sort of be in opposition to Marianne, like she doesn't get to voice it.
Yeah, she appreciates the beauty, but she feels like I feel that she feels like she has to temper Marianne to keep Marianne from going off the deep end. She has to be the voice
Take
of
it down a
reason.
notch.
Right.
Yeah. But I do think that the contrast between Edward and, is it Edward or Edmund? Anyway, Edward.
Edward is his sensibility.
Yeah, is really striking, and I do think they exaggerate, which Elinor points out. You know, she says that Marianne is, well, Edward is avoiding one kind of affectation by sort of maybe being a little bit more practical and realistic than he really believes, and Marianne, in contrast, is being more high flown and more poetic than she maybe really feels, which I'm actually, now that I think about it, I think she does really feel that, but I'm not a Marianne not a Marianne fan, so I think she's over the top. It's hilarious.
I think you see some Marianne also in Fanny, like Fanny's reaction to nature sometimes also feels it's so sincere,
Yes.
but
Just
sometimes
about,
it does feel a little over the top.
yes, I was just about to bring that up because it's been so long since I've read Mansfield Park. I was really surprised at how poetic and effusive Fanny was about the picturesque and the landscape. And I was like, that is not my impression of Fanny at all. I think of her as being so timid and quiet and practical and dull. And I was like, wow, I didn't remember this at all. And so I was thinking about it and I thought, why would she be so poetic and effusive about nature? And it occurred to me, that's her one chance to be free to express her opinions. She is not allowed to express her opinions about almost anything around the Bertrams. And she's just so put upon that nature is the one thing she can just say, this is my opinion, and put it out there unapologetically.
And you compare that with her arch rival, Mary Crawford from London, who has 0.0 appreciation right. for landscape. And you're in this beautiful setting, and all you think is about how you can pay to get your harp here and nonsense like that. So, you know,
right.
Austen is giving, I hate to do fanboy Austen, but giving Fanny more roundedness compared to her bright and shining arch rival.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And I think especially because Fanny loves Cooper, I think there's like a spiritual element in nature for Fanny that maybe like at our kind of time we don't have a full understanding of that, but Cooper was a very religious poet as well as celebrating nature and sort of seeing God in nature. So I think that there's that part of it also that maybe these days we don't fully get, but
yeah, maybe it was her way of saying that Mary Crawford was godless.
Well, there's definitely a contrast between Fanny and Mary Crawford. I'm glad that the people who hosted this sort of flagged up the different points in Mansfield Park just to read about the landscape, because there is the original one where Fanny is sort of bemoaning the fact that they're going to cut down the avenue at Southerton. And it's not that long, but she just says, oh, that's too bad. She has her sort of poetic musings. But then when she goes to Mary Crawford's, where Mary Crawford is staying, I forget the name of the parsonage, right? And she has a couple of really long speeches. It's like you said, Diane, she's not afraid to wax poetic about nature and to sort of, she talks about memory and how important that is. I think Fanny's very, very much wanting stability and the old things, right? But she has these extremely long speeches to Mary Crawford, and she's not afraid to hold her own, even when she sees that Mary Crawford is like, no, whatever, and she just keeps going on about it. So I thought that was really interesting because it's almost like she's starting to get stronger in a way, or not less afraid to speak up.
Yes.
That was quite interesting.
Well, you said the pining for the old things or wanting the old things. The very first discussion question was the very first thing I put down was that everybody's each heroine's experience with place was based on their dependence on others. They were all dependent on others, but it depended on how dependent they were affected their relationship to place.
Yeah.
Catherine, Elizabeth, and Emma had very stable homes. So Elizabeth was confident, Emma was confident, Catherine was naive, but confident in her way. But the heroines who had lost their homes, Marianne and Elinor, Fanny and Anne, were dependent on others, so they weren't as carefree and happy. And they did long for ability of.
Oh, you cut out there.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying they long for the stability of the past.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
So that question was sort of like, how does having a stable home affect Elizabeth, Catherine, and Emma, and then how does kind of that loss of stability, and Marianne and Elinor have their father's death. Fanny doesn't really have a death, but she loses her family when she moves homes. And Anne loses her mother and Captain Wentworth. So they all have a lot of loss, but I think the loss of home is also important for all of them. And to me, I think it connects with sort of Elizabeth, Emma, and Catherine all have to learn like the world is more complicated than you think it is, and you don't know everything. And I feel like Fanny, Elinor, and Anne really already have a sense of like, yeah, the world is not as simple as I thought it was. Marianne has to learn that also. But I think that, yeah, there's that sort of like loss is part of what they all have to learn how to handle as part of getting your happy ending. You have to kind of work through some loss first.
Mm-hmm.
That's my Michelle being a psychologist question. I am trained as a psychologist originally. So. Any other thoughts about like sort of that loss of home or stability, instability?
Oh, it definitely affects their personality, which drives the books, Austen's novels. You see that throughout the novels, the varying, personalities between Elizabeth and Elliot, for example.
Yeah, definitely.
They would make good friends. I think of all the heroines, I think Elizabeth and Anne Elliot would be suitable friends.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that this just occurred to me, and I may be way off base, but have the ones who lost their homes, are they searching for stability in a person? Like Anne Elliot was, so dependent upon Mrs. Russell. And Fanny is so drawn Edmund, and each one has a person in their lives that they kind of turn to or depend upon in some way for their stability
That does make sense.
instead of a home.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
But I think that's true to some extent, but I think they also, especially Anne Elliot and Fanny in Mansfield Park, I think it's Fanny, they make their homes, they make where they are their own. Like Fanny says, when she drives to Southerton, then there's a line where it says that her own thoughts and feelings were her, they're her best companions. So she didn't really expect to take part in the conversation. And there's that extraordinary description of how she made the East Room her home, with all of her memories of what Edmund had given her and different pictures and things like that. So she's really made that her home. And then that immediately contrasts with Mary, who's been living at the parsonage and really couldn't care less where she's living. It's the people that she's interested in. Although I do agree that both of them are looking for a home with their partner, for sure, definitely.
Well, I love the East Room section. How, as you say, she made that her home with all her collections and everything. And she slept in her little room, but that East Room was she made that into a home for herself. And I really liked that she was able to do that she was given that space.
Yeah.
Because she wasn't given much in that family. Yeah. She was always just, especially from Mrs. Norris, just pushed aside. Oh, Fanny will stay home. Fanny will do this. Fanny will walk down here, in the heat. And she was
Mrs. Norris is evil.
She was really used by our.
Yeah.
There's like two tasks. One is like becoming your own person, your own independent person, and being able to like form a stable relationship. And I think, there's a point in all of the books where the heroine has to be like, if things don't work out with the hero, I'll be okay. And like that there has to be that acceptance for there to be sort of the happy ending. Yeah, so it's like find your own stability and then you can create a stable relationship also.
I mean, there's one thing that I'm not sure if it's about landscape so much, but it's about developing your own idea of place in Persuasion. I've always been really struck by the vocabulary that's used in Jane Austen's novels. And I noticed that as I was reading these landscape passages, then different vocabulary was used in each one. Like, for example, in one, I can't remember which one, but she uses the word improvement. Well, that's in Mansfield Park, but she uses the word improvements at least 4 times in one paragraph. And then in another one, she uses poetical, poetry. I think when someone is quoting some poetry. So I'm always quite interested when they use which language that she uses. And I noticed that in Persuasion, when Anne is leaving Uppercross and going to Kellynch, that even though it's a miserable day, she still, she's got great memories of Uppercross that she's going to carry with her. And then when she goes to Kellynch, the language is all of comparison. And I'll just read you. She said she arrives in, I guess when she arrives with Lady Musgrove, that she says that now all of the subjects that her heart had been full of were now of secondary interest. And then she said Anne would have been ashamed to have it known how much more she was thinking of Lyme, and how much more interesting to her was the home and friendship of the Harvilles. And then she talks about how much less her father was as a manager. She says the Crofts were so fortunate. They set a good example. They were going to give the poor the best attention and relief. She says, in her conscience, she felt they were gone who deserved not to stay and that Kellynch had passed into better hands. I mean, there's just so much vocabulary about comparison in Persuasion. I just find it fascinating. So I noticed that on this reading.
Especially because Sir Walter also is like, he thinks he's the best.
I know, it's just incredible. So funny.
Nice
Can
to
you,
highlight.
I didn't see the discussion questions. Were there more discussion specific questions to think about?
Does anyone have it handy that they could put in the chat? I do not have, I have it printed out, but I don't have it. Oh, Francis put the link. So if you go to the link, you can download the, it's on our website.
Oh, okay.
Oh, Francis is putting them in. Thank you, Francis.
The first, well, I guess the second discussion question is Northanger Abbey, about Catherine's experience colored by her Gothic expectations compared to her experience at Woodstown Parsonage. And I think the difference between how she views those two places is all about her expectations. And when she goes to Northanger Abbey, she wants it to be an adventure. She wants it to be a Gothic novel. And she's expecting darkness and secrets and things like that. And then she is so embarrassed at her own mistakes that she has made, and she's so ashamed of how she behaved at Northanger Abbey, and her Gothic imagination, that when she went to Woodstown, her expectations of Woodstown are, this is going to be my home. This is where I want to live. And she was looking at it from a perspective of total reality. How would I like to live here? Whereas not going to Disneyland and having an adventure, but going home. And what is this really like compared to where I grew up? And could I see myself living here? And so she viewed all of Woodstown through her real eyes, not through the lens of a Gothic novel. She wanted it to be homey and comfortable and real. And she saw it all through the eyes of someone who was in love and wanted that to be her home.
I love the detail that one of the rooms doesn't have furniture yet because, like Henry's, he's a bachelor. And that detail just seems so wonderful to me that, he hasn't done up that room yet.
And she's so naive. She doesn't understand when she blurts things out. She doesn't understand how that's being taken by the, and oh, you should fit up this room. It's so beautiful. It's the most beautiful room. It would be so beautiful if it were fitted up. And the men are like, okay, well, you're going to do the fitting up. You're the one, we're waiting for the woman to put her touch on it. And she's just so naive. She's just like, yeah, it's so beautiful. And that Henry is like, oh, I'm so glad she likes it.
But Henry is not as, like the general is like embarrassing Henry because he's so like blatant about how he's trying to court her. And poor Henry is like he wants her to be happy, but he doesn't want it to be super obvious either.
Yeah, you'd be jumping off on that. The general says, "Oh, those trees over there, they block the view, so I'm going to chop them down." And Catherine goes, "No, don't do that." And the general says, "Okay, yep, cancel that plan. I'm not going to chop down those trees."
The cottage and the apple trees.
Yeah.
Yeah, the general doesn't have a lot of subtlety. And still, Catherine doesn't pick up on it.
Well, I think there she starts getting embarrassed by the general. I think she's beginning to like
Yeah.
notice that he's embarrassing her because he's just so blatant.
Right. Yeah, she does. But it takes her a long time to
Right.
figure out.
Yeah. I also love the other chapter where they're doing the tour of Northanger Abbey, the outside tour, and how the general just keeps throwing out like how expensive things are, but Catherine is like so naive that she doesn't even like understand that that's what he's doing. And she's really interested in the grove of Scotch firs that Mrs. Tilney liked because that's the sign that she was miserable. And the general's like dropping all these hints about like the pinery having 100 pineapples. That's really, really expensive stuff. And again, like we wouldn't know that these days, but at that time, people would know, oh man, he must be rolling in dough if his pineapple house produces 100 pineapples. That's my little geeking out on Regency gardening.
Whereas the Allen's greenhouse is basically just used for a few potted plants.
The general has many, many ways that he can feel contempt for other people and feel superior to everyone else, including his hothouses.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about Emma. Anybody, I think contrasting like the Pemberley chapter and the Donwell Abbey chapter are really interesting because the Pemberley chapter, we are so much in Elizabeth's head almost the whole time. And in the Donwell Abbey chapter, we're in Emma's head a little bit, but there's so much else going on. Um, just kind of curious what people think about the Donwell Abbey chapter and
Well, I think in similarity to the Pemberley chapter, Emma starts to see Mr. Knightley. I don't know if she starts to, I mean, she's known him all of her life, but she notices how well he takes care of her father and has his comfort in mind. How attentive he is to the needs of everybody. When they go on the walk in the garden and he stands and chats with Harriet, and he's only talking to her about farming methods and everything, but Emma notices, previously he would have considered it out of the realm of his social circle to be able to talk to somebody like Harriet. But now he will, he wants her to feel comfortable and feel like she is part of the party. And he doesn't put himself so far above her. His Donwell Abbey and that whole day there shows how he is steady and respectable and unchanged, just like the landscape is unchanged. Maybe a little bit neglected, but natural beauty. And that's how I think Emma is seeing him.
He definitely has gardeners if he's got a nice strawberry patch.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah,
Which if I'm correct, I don't believe was enclosed. So I guess there's no rodents or anything like that in England. So
it probably was in the kitchen garden. That tended to be where strawberry beds were. So often
sure.
the kitchen gardens would be walled, um, like around the perimeter, but not necessarily within.
Sure. Similar to Chawton House, that big walled garden behind Chawton House. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And like Pemberley, Donwell Abbey fits in its landscape. Now it's awkward because it was an abbey and it goes off to the side, and its construction is odd, but yet it fits where it is. It's not a Rosings where it's dropped in and then fiddled with. It is perfect. English garden, English verdure, English beauty, and so forth.
English culture. The English culture in that phrase is actually kind of means English agriculture, not English like culture.
That's right. That's where I was actually going to. I was going there. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
And I was going to link that to the next day, Box Hill. Who's been to Box Hill? Oh yeah, me. I've been to Box Hill, but it's a perfect place, ruined by the awkwardness of the people. And of course, the stabilizing force for both Emma and Frank Churchill, Mrs. Weston, is not at Box Hill where she is at Donwell Abbey. So she could smooth over any problems that happened at Box, but she's not there. The perfect landscape gets ruined by the people there.
Yeah, I was thinking about including the Box Hill chapter, but there's actually very, very little description of landscape, which when I was reading through the chapter again, it was kind of surprising that like hardly anything at all.
Yeah, mostly the temperature.
Yeah.
Hot summer day.
I just want to mention Mavis Beatty had the chapter where she talks about the Donwell Abbey she's talking about Mr. Knightley being like a responsible landlord and connecting sort of him in that role to Jane Austen's brother, Edward Austen Knight, who was the owner of Godmersham and Chawton. And one thing about Mr. Knightley that kind of gets mentioned in the Donwell Abbey chapter about cutting clover, there's like hints several times in the book that Mr. Knightley is actually very modern when it comes to growing crops and using like the 4-crop rotation system that's supposed to be much better for soil. And again, like, we're reading it this time, you probably wouldn't know that. But so there's like all of this preservation of his timber and preservation of their gardens, but then there's these modern things of he uses a drill and he rotates the crops. And so he's very modern in ways.
He's not perfect. Isn't there a suggestion that he's going to enclose part of his farm?
No, that's the wrong opinion of the secret radical book. Oh, no. All he says to John Knightley is, should I move the path over from one side to the other? He never mentions enclosure. And that's a particularly wrong thing by that awful secret radical book. Don't get me started. Okay, I just sorry.
That's
sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
But moving the path over isn't I don't like that book either, Ethan. I haven't read it. Okay, I've read about it anyway. Okay, so that's fine. But I think that Emma's got some really interesting things in it. Like if you look at it, Mr. Knightley and Emma do not talk. They have no exchange of conversation when she goes to Donwell Abbey. It's basically like they don't talk. So there's very few times where Knightley and Emma even talk that much in the novel, but they do talk at Box Hill. But it's only time he talks to her is to reprimand her for being so mean to Miss Bates. And actually, Miss Elton, even though she gets hot picking the strawberries, she doesn't do anything terrible. She does nothing as rude as Emma. And when they go to Box Hill, she says, the author says that Eltons basically didn't show any reluctance to mix. Like they were happy to sit down and talk to people. And it's Emma who's actually quite rude when she goes to Box Hill. I just find that all really quite interesting and kind of dark in a way. It's just, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna
horrible rudeness around Jane, but that's kind of a constant, But aside from that,
all right.
But Emma is nice to Jane at Donwell Abbey.
Yes, she is.
Wants to give her a ride home and help her.
Yes, that's true.
And you're soft pedaling Mrs. Elton's behavior at Donwell because she's really ratcheting up the Jane take the governor's job. And that's part of the reason why Jane flees, is she's had enough of Mrs. Elton. And being a Mr. Knightley super fan, I'll object to the comment about them not having interactions. They have interactions at the Weston's party. It's a very short period, but they solve the problem. They work together and solve the problem of getting Mr. Woodhouse out of there with the snow. They're very short exchanges, but they're solving problems, and they reconcile over the child. We agree on everything except for one or two things. So that's a beautiful short passage that they have together.
Yes, I know they have exchanges. So it was just at Donwell Abbey they don't have an exchange.
Well, he has all these other guests that he has to deal with.
Well, I think Emma notices that he set things up well for her father. So it's kind of like she's noticing things about him even if they're not talking.
I think that it's okay. I love Emma. I love that whole scene. So don't get me wrong. I think I just thought it just struck me that it's just there's other stuff in there that I hadn't noticed the first time around.
Yeah. And definitely, like the Pemberley chapter is so focused on Elizabeth and Darcy, and the Donwell Abbey chapter is focused really on sort of the community and not just Emma and Knightley.
And I do think that Jane Austen is talking when there's that passage about it was a sweet view, English view, English culture, English landscape, English, I think that was, I don't know, it's like a fundamental quote of Jane Austen. It's just always struck me.
Yeah, and sort of that theme of Knightley represents England, Frank Churchill represents France, and sort of someone who has very maybe good manners, but doesn't have this sort of solid goodness underneath those manners. How about Persuasion? We've hit on Persuasion a little bit. I know we have several Persuasion fans here. Want to make sure we have time to talk about Persuasion.
Well, there's a long passage about the looking over from Lyme and looking at the scenery that really doesn't appear anywhere else in Jane Austen. And I was actually talking with David Shepard, to drop a name, and we were saying to each other, would Jane Austen have cut that out if she had time to edit it? And hopefully not, because it's such a beautiful passage. And in the previous Zoom today, it was discussed that Jane Austen went to Lyme a couple times, so that was bringing in her direct view of that beautiful scenery. And that, I think the last visit was in 1804. Why is that important? Because her father died in January 05, and so there's a last sort of family trip remembered, so it has all that beauty around it. And so she said, she just, let herself go. I'm going to put 4 pages of scenery that I haven't done before. It's magnificent, as well as the scene. I don't know if I think you've quoted it. Where Anne is doing the whole autumnal beauty thing, and the narrator sort of pokes fun at her. Anne is spreading this beautiful perfume of the fall leaves, fall tint, autumnal tint, and so forth. But it's wonderful.
But I love her little thing about the farmer meaning to have spring again. It's like Anne's got all this sort of melancholy going on, and Austen's like, yeah, but let's get back to reality, and the farmer's plowing, and there's gonna be spring. I think in that scene, Anne is being the Marianne and Austen is being the Elinor.
I have a question for Kirk from Boston. Are you still there?
I'm listening, yeah.
Are you the one who just said that you were talking to David Shepard?
Yes, I was.
I just finished reading the annotated Pride and Prejudice.
Yes.
And I thought it was just fantastic. He's so good.
Great. I'm glad you think that. Yes, I'm a big fan.
I mean, I'm going to buy all of them actually, because I've read all of the academic ones, the Oxford and this is a bit of a sidebar, folks, but the Oxford and the Penguin ones. But when I read that one, I thought he brought so much more to it. And actually during the big read, a lot of the questions that were asked were answered in his book. So it was just fantastic. So I'm going to get all of his series.
Yeah. And they're now on Kindle for a somewhat reasonable price.
Well, I'll be getting the print one because I love the print book. But
okay, great.
Yeah,
great.
I feel like that would be hard to do on Kindle, where you're looking back and forth with notes.
Yeah, and
except that the notes in the Kindle are a lot shorter than the print ones. So I'll like 10% of it or 20% of the time I'll go back and forth, but it's not so bad. It's not so bad.
What was the name of that?
It's certainly better.
What was the name of that?
Better than Harvard Press.
What's the name of that guy that did the annotated?
It's David Shepard.
Okay.
Shepard.
Shapard.
Shapard. Okay.
Yeah, and he's annotated all of them, all 6 of them, apparently. Yes, there it is. And it's fantastic. Because not only does he explain sort of the obscure vocabulary, like the material things that we might not know about, he actually has literary analysis in there as well, which I found fascinating, pointing out the language and also the historical context, and really, really, plus lots of illustrations and maps. It's fantastic. Anyway, that's the end of my sidebar.
Thank you. Yes. Yes.
It's funny that Anne and Fanny and Marianne are all sort of poetry fans, and kind of use their poetry to connect with nature and to kind of cope with things. And I feel like in Persuasion, they're really kind of discussing it between Anne and Captain Benwick, like how much poetry reading and sort of coping through literature is okay. And
yeah, she felt that maybe Captain Benwick should read more prose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was just kind of curious about there's that consistency of Marianne and Fanny all being fans of poetry. And I am not a big poetry person, but I'm kind of curious, in in Persuasion, it's a lot of the romantic poets that they discuss. So kind of wondering, like, if any of you are poetry fans, does that bring extra meaning to the discussion if you've actually read Byron, which
I
not
have
sure
read
that I
some of
ever
them.
have.
I can say that even the first time I read Persuasion, I thought, I've never felt like that at all when I was walking through nature, which I do believe that I appreciate. And I live right beside a huge park. And but I've never sort of walked through it reciting poetry to myself. So, I don't know.
Any Byron fans here?
I like the poetry, but I just didn't. I don't sort of go around reciting it to myself and thinking about autumnal leaves. No. But actually, in this passage, she does say there was some attempt at description or some lines of feeling, but she basically said that the poetry doesn't do justice to the nature, I think. I do have something else to say about Persuasion that isn't so much about the poetry, but their walk to Uppercross, as when I was rereading it, it struck me so much like a mission. I mean, it was an ordeal, and Anne still manages to get pleasure out of nature. She seems to be the only one who's sort of really enjoying the beauty of it, and everybody else is tramping along, and Charles is beating at the hedgerow with things, and there are nuts here, and there are stiles and crosses and hills and paths, and it just seemed to be an exhausting thing. I just thought that was actually quite funny. It really seemed like a trek, a real trek.
And then there's Winthrop.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Louisa and Henrietta both had an agenda.
Yeah.
Louisa's agenda is, I want to get Captain Wentworth for myself and get Henrietta back with her beau. And, Henrietta was, I want to try to see if I can find Charles Hayter.
Yeah.
But
yeah, barns and buildings.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the few times when Jane Austen gets away from the trees and the leaves and the gardens is when they're describing Winthrop, the barns and buildings.
yeah. How did you, reading just that section, how did you all experience Wentworth in that chapter? He's so harsh on Anne that it's a little hard to read, I think. Anyone else feel that way?
I'm not a big fan of Wentworth at the beginning, so that just reinforces my, grow up. You're over 30. It's been 8 years. You can do better. Make polite conversation. You're a sea captain. Granted, you're a pirate, but you're a sea captain who's supposed to be a diplomat. You're supposed to be an ambassador. Do better. And now, obviously, him helping Anne into the gig or whatever it is with the Crofts, heroic, no doubt about it. But say something nice there. You can do it. We've seen you lie through your teeth with Mrs. Musgrove. You can lie to Anne. Or,
perhaps he's still heartbroken after all those years. He just can't get over her. Haven't met anybody like her, so he's just he's convincing himself that he's over her.
He can do better.
It's some anger he's got to work through.
He's afraid of getting. I think he's a little bit trepidatious. He had his heart broken by her, and she's, not giving him a lot of signals. So it's, yeah.
8 years.
Well, Anne, she's been holding out for 8 years too.
Yeah. But it is
also,
amusing. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, for him, he's he has that loss, but there was nothing that made him question his point of view. So he was pretty able to hang on to his anger because nothing made him question whether he was right in his interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he had to experience things that kind of slapped his face around and said, see reality for what it is, not for what you think it is.
I will give him credit for just moving his facial muscle when Mary Musgrove is being ridiculous about not visiting her relations. He doesn't say anything, but his muscles move just slightly. So Anne picks up on it, but no one else does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the whole solid nut thing is an interesting discussion.
All the happiness that a nut is capable of.
Okay.
Have we covered all of the discussion questions?
We're open for anything. I mean, I think we've touched on all of them, but certainly open for anything people want to talk about.
Well, it's interesting when Emma thinks that Mr. Knightley's going to marry Harriet. This all of a sudden this huge super storm comes in the summer. So this beautiful English landscape is turned into this nightmare for one day, and then the sun comes out the next day, and she goes out into the garden, and Knightley comes along.
Yeah, that's
beautiful.
It's pretty
contrast. Yeah.
And because it's July, the day is so long that like you just keep seeing the bad weather
Yeah.
and the trees losing their leaves. Kind
in
of
July.
reflecting her
Yeah.
mood.
Well, one little thing, I was just looking back at my notes. Get my camera right there. Sorry about that. This isn't really the gardening stuff, but in Northanger Abbey, when they go to Woodston and Catherine is so overcome with it, she said she couldn't speak. And I thought, well, that was an interesting reaction, that she had no words, that how much she was impressed with its natural.
When she first gets there, right?
When she first gets there, yes.
Yeah.
And she couldn't even speak. I thought that was an interesting reaction to walking in and looking at a place that was pretty and natural and inviting, instead of just saying, oh, isn't this pretty? No, she just could not speak, had no words.
And resided by one person versus her 11 siblings.
Yes.
I think also it was because the general was kind of putting her on the spot at that same time.
Yes. He's something else.
Yes. So it was like she had this reaction, but also he was putting her on the spot, and like that made it harder.
Yeah. He wanted her to react to everything in his way that he would react to it, over, yes, oh, this is so fantastic, the best, whatever.
Yeah. The one other thing I wanted to
Yeah.
mention about Sense and Sensibility, when they go to Cleveland, and Marianne has this reaction, partly I think, partly her reaction is because she can imaginarily see where Willoughby lived. Um, but I think Jane Austen also is like throwing a little bit of shade at the Palmers, because the trees that are like mentioned there are all like sort of quick growing and not good wood. And like they've got the Grecian temple, and so it's sort of like this is maybe like a modern kind of nouveau riche house, that again, like, we wouldn't necessarily know that the trees that are screening Cleveland are all like rapid growers, but they're so like, Pemberley has the oaks and the chestnuts that are like trees that take 80 years to grow to maturity. And Cleveland's got these newfangled trees that are pretty quick growers. So again, it's kind of like there's these little ways of Austen throwing shade or telling you things that contemporary people might know, but not necessarily the modern reader.
And up to that point, Mr. Palmer has been superficial and, so grumpy. I mean, team grumpy here myself, but he's been so horribly grumpy and so horribly, not interactive in any civil form. And so, okay, yeah, it's a horrible building with a horrible guy. And then the crisis comes and he steps up. Shocking. He does the right thing when Marianne becomes ill. And you wonder how much Mrs. Palmer has to do with the landscape. So again, she's good-hearted, but not exactly. Go ahead.
As you described that, I when you said, but Mr. Palmer steps up, I was like, so the McMansion and the superficial landscape and all the shallowness is probably Mrs. Palmer's doing. And he's just grumpy because he got stuck with her.
Yeah.
But as what's her name, the mother-in-law so rightly says,
Mrs. Jennings, yeah.
Yes, Mrs. Jennings, you made your choice.
Yep, exactly.
And you cannot give her back.
Yeah. It's like Mr. Bennet made his choice.
Yes.
Yep, exactly.
Yep.
The other part of Sense and Sensibility that I find pretty interesting is Mrs. Jennings' description of Delaford. She describes it as like such an old-fashioned place, but like so stable. And like there's the walled garden, there's the mulberry tree, there's lots of grapefruit trees. So it's kind of like she's telling you, Mr. or Colonel Brandon is a catch.
Yeah.
And
Mrs. Palmer says, "Oh, well, he was kind of looking at me, but I went in a different direction." No, he would have never gone for you. I don't care if you had 50,000 pounds. He wasn't going for you.
Yeah.
But, you keep to that illusion.
It's like another way that Jane Austen kind of, like says that Colonel Brandon is actually a good catch, or like that he would be a good husband because he's sort of got this estate that he has kept in good order, and that kind of preserved the history of it. Other thoughts, other questions?
Well, Michelle, thank you for putting together this whole thing and with the links and questions and all. It made it a fun study.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Thank
it was really interesting to go through the books, focusing only on one topic. And actually, not just, and so to explore the books, like what the books say, but also comparing across the books, what, I can't remember which one it is, but I thought, oh, what happens here is exactly what happens in the other book. So there was nice comparisons across the books. It's really interesting.
All right. Well, if anyone else has anything else, we can stop if not. Thanks for coming, everyone, and thanks so much to everyone who came and talked, and people who came and listened. We we always seem to have the talkers and the not talkers, and that's great. And it's fine, and I appreciate everybody who came. People who are in the region know we're not a super big region. And so we always make our Zoom meetings open to other people because we like to have a good discussion, and so we love it when people come from other places.
What region are you? Remind me.
Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho.
Oh, okay.
So we're on the farming sort of side of Washington.
Right.
And
right.
I guess
Teresa, where are you?
I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia.
Ah, okay.
I'm Canadian.
I'm in Arizona.
Good day,
I'm Diana's mom, the other Diana. Hi, Diana.
I know Washington is the one who developed the Cosmic Crisp apple, I believe.
Yes.
Which I love. But now I'm afraid I'm not able to eat them for a while.
They still can't beat English apples. I'm not a big apple fan, but when I visited Chawton House in 2017, and before I toured the house, self-tour, the gal in the little office there said, when you come back, change maps, and you go out in the garden and eat as many apples as you want. And so I thought, well, okay, whatever, I'll try an apple. And I found myself shoving a whole bunch in my pockets there. Those English apples are outstanding. I've not eaten anything. Years and years ago, I was working at a grocery store when I was in high school, and the produce manager got some apples from New Zealand. It was just a one-time thing, and they were perfectly red and outside and perfectly white inside. So those were pretty good. But yeah, if you ever make it over to England, try to go over there in like September, early October. I was in there late September when apples were in season. Oh my goodness. Oh,
I wonder if those were like heritage varieties, but the older.
I don't know. Obviously, walking in the garden, these apple trees weren't very tall. I don't think any of them were more than, say, 10 feet tall. And so they tend to grow out a little bit. But I mean, it looked like they'd been there for a couple hundred years for all I know. But they were, oh my goodness, they're outstanding. Yeah, if you ever go over there, that's the reason to go to Chopton, is not to see the house, but to eat those apples.
Do you know about the Lost Apple Project that's connected? It's somewhat connected with WSU. So they go around to like old homesteads in Washington State and sometimes also in Idaho, and they try to find like missing varieties of apples that are old, and then they'll sell like the little trees that people can plant in their gardens if they want to do that. Anyway, they're on Facebook if you just look up Lost Apple Project, if you ever want to try to find some of the old varieties.
I wonder if they'd been to Spirit Lake, Idaho. I delivered the Spokesman Review up there, and course, along my route, I would stop in some of the houses and pick some apples because there's some pretty good different varieties up in Spirit Lake, Idaho. So
Yeah,
that's
I
the
don't know.
Lost Apple. What was that again?
The Lost Apple Project.
Project. Okay.
And if you look at them on Facebook, like they have information about when they're having their sales. And they usually deliver, I think, like to Spokane and Pullman's so that people can buy the.
So I would be curious if an English apple tree is here in the United States, because I thought if I had a greenhouse out here, I'd like to get a hold of an English apple tree.
Yeah.
But like you were saying, I don't know is it a heritage? Yeah, I don't know. I never thought to ask them when I was there. I just was.
A lot of the old varieties came to the United States from England, back ancient times.
I bet you if you ask on their Facebook page, they'll probably answer.
Yeah.
They're very responsive to stuff.
Yeah.
There's also the Apple Commission in Wenatchee.
Oh, that's a good idea.
They've got a little. If you actually go to Wenatchee, they've got a little building where you go and hear about different things about apples. Every time we went to Wenatchee, we always stopped off because it was interesting to hear about what was going on with apples. So.
Right. Well, when I made my way back, I spent a day in Charlton, and I had to take the train, and then I rented a car and drove there. I guess now the train actually stops in Alton, just outside of Charlton. But at the time I was there, they were doing construction and it hadn't reached Winchester yet. So I had to take a train to Winchester and then rent a car. There's an Enterprise rental at the train station there. And I rented a car there. But I noticed that when I finished my touring Charlton, I got back to Bath, and I was walking, as I was saying, in a hotel in Bath in Queen Square. And I was walking around, and there's some, vendors out there in different places. And somebody walked by and asked this guy, and I heard this guy say, "Hey, are those English apples?" And the guy said, "Yes, they are." And I thought about buying some, but my refrigerator in the hotel was already full of English apples. But so, it's something I think that other people are interested in that are in Bath. And whether this person asked that question was from England or tourist, I have no idea, but I'll definitely look into that and see.
When you look at the old gardening books from England, like from the Regency period, so late 1700s, early 1800s, the variety of apples is huge.
Oh,
it's, like 200.
Okay.
Because they wanted to have kind of maximum start as early as possible, go as late as possible.
Right.
So, who knows what the Chawton one is, but that Roseanne's suggestion might be good, of contacting them to find out, what exact variety it is.
I actually occasionally get emails from Chawton House. So I might just email them and find out. Yeah.
Probably the most direct route.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I send out the video link, I have a blog that I did a couple years ago about apples and the orchards at Dunwell Abbey. So
right. Well, what I would tell you is that when the cosmic apples came out, I was looking forward to it, and I tried them, and I thought, well, they don't compare anything to those English apples that I had. So,
I'm just on that note. I actually, I've sort of followed them as soon as they came out, and I think that they come from different farms. Like some of them seem to be different. So I think it depends sometimes on which farm you're getting it from.
And I saw something. Maybe Michelle might know something about this, but I see where Wazoo has come up with an improved cosmic apple, and they're calling it something different now. I saw that here a couple weeks ago on Facebook. So,
yeah.
Who knew that this discussion about landscape in Jane Austen would go into cosmic crisp apples and other apples?
Yeah, and English apples, yes. And not strawberries.
Oh, I could talk about strawberries too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
As did Mrs. Elton.
Well, what's interesting is every single strawberry that she mentions is a real strawberry.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
And and I have pictures of it. I think it's in the same section as the same blog where I talk about the apples. So
Hmm.
I'll put the link in when I send around the video link if anyone's interested.
Sure.
It's really neat to look at the old pictures and to see, like what old pictures of the fruit. So I have lots of those pictures on the website. All right, now I think we are going to stop. Thank you everyone for coming. It was really great. And we'll, for people in the region, I'll be sending out some information very soon, trying to plan for May for an in-person. Hopefully we might have 2 teas this year, one in May and one at Jane Austen's birthday. To really celebrate. So, but I'll be sending that out soon with a survey of different options. All right, take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
That was great. Thank you.
thank you. Good night.